So Tim, great to have you in RESi360 in the 360 studio, Studio 360 rather. You just gave a really fascinating data-rich presentation that gave an overview of the UK residential market. And for the benefit of people who may not have, who didn't see your presentation, I think the big question that's going to be on everyone's mind is house prices. Mm-hmm. Are we going to see a fall, or are we just going to see slower, more moderate growth?
Well, I think some of the things we covered in the presentation sort of lead us to believe that at the moment what we're still seeing is really strong demand, and there's not enough property to meet that demand. So as a result of that, that tends to have been a strong lead indicator of where prices might be heading. So as a result of that, we think prices at the moment, they're currently up around 8% to 9%. I think by the end of the year it's going to be a little softer than that, around 7%. And I think as we lead into next year, the likelihood is that we'll see sort of a softening of prices, but we're still fundamentally seeing lots of people wanting to move, and not enough property.
And how much will the Bank of England's interest rate decision next Thursday, I believe, and also the mini budget that's not a budget that we're all preparing for, how much will that impact demand, do you think, or is it more that, I suppose, the cost of living crisis that we're seeing, lots of headlines around?
Well, I think there's so many different factors playing into people's decision making at the moment. So, we've had, if you think back to the pandemic, which we're sort of tail end of, or perhaps we're out of it, that changed our relationships with our homes. It meant people fundamentally really wanted to move if they could.
Yeah.
And there have been a number of headwinds that we've seen throughout 2020, 2021. And throughout all of that, we've still seen this really strong desire to move.
Yeah.
So we fast forward into 2022, and we've seen interest rates increase. We've seen concerns around affordability. We've seen cost of living crisis. We've seen energy prices talked about a lot and going up, of course. But against all of that, what we have still seen is a really strong desire to move. So the demand levels in the sales market and the rental market are still at very high levels. We're still up 87% above where we were from the sales market from a demand per property perspective, where we were in the 5 years prior to, 5-year average prior to 2020. So 2015 through 2019 average. So we're still at very, very high levels from a demand per property perspective. So the market has proved very, very resilient. There are lots of reasons for that. I think fundamentally it's that desire to move. Obviously, there have been changes over the years around following off the mortgage market review and around responsible lending and so on, around affordability checks to make sure we don't end up in a position where people are too stretched from a mortgage perspective. But we do know that is tightening from an affordability perspective. We know it's tightening as well on the rental side of things. But at the moment, people are still assessing that and deciding that they do want to move. I suppose the good news at the moment is that there is more stock coming to the market in the sales market. We've seen that tick up over the last few months. So that's taking a little bit of that heat out of the market, sort of moderating it a bit. But as I say, we're still at sort of 87% above where we were back in the pre-pandemic times.
And moving on to the rental market, which you started alluding to, that there's similarly quite a lot of heat in that sector of the residential market. There's been quite a lot of talk about how in urban areas that there's been pent-up demand, and there's a hint that maybe some of that was seasonal with students moving back in, and arguably more so than house prices. Residential rents typically track wages, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So how do you see sort of this inflation that's proving less transitory than we were told it was going to be, biting into the rental market in the next sort of 6 to 18 months?
Yeah, I mean, the rental market at the moment, when we look at the key metrics we look at around demand per property, so number of people looking per property available for them to actually rent, where we've seen that ease in the sales market, we are not seeing that same behaviour just yet in the rental market. So, we are fundamentally seeing really strong demand. Part of that is down to sort of return to the cities. Part of that's down to the emergence of hybrid working and how people are dealing with that. Part of that's due to students returning. So all these different elements mean that demand's pretty strong. And at the same time, we're not seeing supply keep up with that. So obviously we're seeing people extend the amount they are extending the time that they're staying in their rental properties, which is taking a bit of stock out of the market, although it does remove a unit of demand down the line. But we are seeing people renew and stay longer. We are seeing some landlords leaving the market. We have seen some evidence of that in some of the analysis we've done, and a movement of properties from smaller landlords to some of those larger landlords. We are seeing some good signs around the build-to-rent market bringing property on stream in some of those central locations where it's really needed. But obviously that's growing, but it's at the moment it's not enough really to keep up. So in terms of where things might head, at the moment when we look at an average salary and the average rent for a first-time buyer type property, so 0, 1, 2 bedroom property, it's about 35% of your income would be going on rent versus 40% if you have a mortgage. So it's growing. So it's been growing.
Presumably, it's that 35. It's higher than that in London.
It's higher. Oh yeah, London is
its own beast.
Yes, the London market. If you're looking at the averages, London market is significantly higher than 35%.
Are we seeing that in other cities as well? Affordability being stretched in the same way, or is London just? I think so.
Unique? London is. It's a very London. It tends to be more extreme, and with most things in property, I think London moves further and moves first, and I think that has been the case with the rental side of things. But it's something that we're seeing elsewhere as well.
And going back to this point that you were talking about moving back to the city, but then there's also hybrid working, and the title of your presentation was Race for Space. So obviously the narrative in the pandemic was everyone leaving the city looking for gardens, looking for that extra bedroom. As they're returning to the city, they need somewhere to work, but then having that extra space to work, it costs them obviously more money. So how is that playing out?
Yeah, so it absolutely happened in the first stages of the pandemic. Because one of the things we can track is where people are inquiring from and where they're inquiring to, because we from a postcode to postcode level. And we could see that, it exploded out of the cities, people looking for properties outside of cities, and that was the same, that occurred in sales and in rent, to a lesser degree in rent than it did in sales. So people stayed a little bit closer. The proportion of leads that were leaving a city was lower in the rental market than it was in the sales market, so the bigger move was more prevalent in the sales market at that time. But what we've seen is that remains the case. So the proportion of leads that are leaving a city are still higher than they were pre-pandemic, but it's come back a little bit from where it was. So we have seen people come back into the city. We have seen people moving within the city. The difference, certainly on the sales side of things, is we haven't had that same issue with supply in the cities, which is why prices haven't moved quite as much in some of those city locations. But that demand level is still been really high.
Okay, and then you touched on build to rent and how that was bringing supply forward. I believe in your presentation you mentioned that there's a small but growing segment of the market with it on the demand side where renters are looking exclusively for these build to rent properties. What do you think that's a result of the industry growing its profile, or just the fact that there's more operational units involved and people understand the benefits that come? And what would you think is the primary driver for people drawing towards build to rent? Is it the provision of on-site amenities such as working, or is it more the fact that they're purpose-built, professionally managed, just better quality?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few. I think there are quite a few reasons at play. I think part of it is the fact that there is more of it available.
There was.
It's coming on. It's coming on at pace. Can't really keep pace with the demand for it. So I think that's definitely a key element here. But I think you've got a product which is in demand from people. They're coming from a student environment where they've lived in private halls. They've got used to a certain level of service and a certain standardization of the rental experience. and they're now looking for that as they progress into their next home or second or third home.
Okay.
And we know that people are looking to rent or are renting for longer than they used to. The time they move into the sales market is getting later and later in their life. And I think what we're seeing is a bit of that demand for the product that's being offered by the build-to-rent providers. It's attractive to that particular segment.
Okay.
And I think we're seeing that grow.
Okay, wonderful. Well, look, Tim, thank you so much for speaking to me just after delivering the presentation. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Nice.